All right, it's good to be with you again on Shepherd Daily. My name is Ben Dankaka. On Shepherd Daily, we build leaders through access to accurate information. It is my desire that you and I will become the leaders we were created to be. All right, so today I'm going to talk about something which is very, very important to you and I, and which is influence. I know that you and I are very, very much interested in becoming influential in our fields of interest. So today we'll be talking about how to become a person of true influence in your field of interest. The key words here are true influence and field of interest. So what does it really mean to be influential? When we talk about influence, we're talking about that person that has the ability to be a game changer in his industry. In other words, we are talking about that person who has the capacity to draw people to follow him or her. In other words, we are talking about that person who has the ability to create impact, to control an entire industry and become that person that people will be willing naturally to follow. So today we'll be looking at the basic way in which we can become a truly influential person in our field of interest. But before we move on to that, I would like us to quickly go through some of the barriers to becoming an influential person in your field of interest. There are certain things we usually think that we have to do or be in order to become an influential person in our fields of interest. Now, these things may not necessarily be wrong. These things may not necessarily be bad. These things may not necessarily be ineffective, but then they are not what you actually need, because they can actually stand as a barrier to prevent you from becoming that influential person that you truly desire to be. So the first thing we're going to do is to expose these things before we move on to the true principles that will enable you become the leader you desire to be in your field of interest. So number one item we're going to look at is money. I know that money is very, very important. I need money to create experiences for myself and my family. And I know you need money to do a lot of things. But when it comes to influence, money isn't really what you need. Of course, we can use money to influence certain things around us. We can use money to even influence people. But in order to truly become a person of influence in your field of interest, money shouldn't be what you should be looking at. Don't say, oh, I have to get money before I become influential in my field of interest. So money shouldn't be your focus. You shouldn't be striving to have money in order to become a person of influence in your field of interest. It doesn't work that way. Money cannot really make you become an influential person in your field of interest. I know, and you also know, that there are lots of people in your field who have a lot of money, but they are not truly influential. We have a lot of wealthy and rich people around us, but they are not truly influential in their field of interest. So to truly become a person of influence in your field of interest is beyond money. The next thing we are going to look at is what? Politics. You don't have to play politics in your field of interest in order to become a person of influence. Politics doesn't really matter when it comes to becoming a truly influential person. And again, you don't have to join politics in order to become a person of influence in the society. I know there are people who feel that, oh, I have to become the president, or when I become the vice president, or when I become a legislator, I'll be able to influence policies. No, you don't have to join politics in order to truly become an influential person. Influence is beyond politics. Of course, politics can help you influence certain decisions in your industry. Politics can help you influence certain decisions in the society. But in order to truly become a person of influence, you must move beyond politics. Now, the next thing I want us to look at is age. There are people who erroneously think that it is only when they get to a certain age that they can become influential in their fields of interest. Wow. With this global economy that we have, with the digital age that we have, you actually don't need to get to a certain age in order to become a person of influence. Once you know what you're doing, once you are qualified to do whatever it is you intend to do in this life, you can become a person of influence from that age. Someone who is 20 years older than you can actually be more influential than you, but at the same time, someone who is 20 years younger than you can become more influential than you in your field of interest. So age doesn't matter. The next thing I want us to look at is what? Location. There are lots of people who feel that, oh, in order for me to become influential in my field of interest, I have to be in a certain country, or I have to be surrounded by certain people. I have to live in certain cities. Look, With this global economy that we have, with this digital age that we have, let me tell you, location doesn't really matter. I am not saying that it doesn't totally matter. There are situations whereby, of course, your place of residence or your place of work does matter. But in order to truly become a person of influence, that is not what you truly need. To become a true person of influence, you have to move beyond location. Location shouldn't be your barrier. So the next point I want us to look at is what? Race. Wow, history has shown to us that regardless of the color of your pigmentation, you can move on to become a person of influence in your field of interest. The lives of Mahatma Gandhi, of Nelson Mandela, of Martin Luther King Jr., of Abraham Lincoln, of Winston Churchill, all the lives of these people have shown us that you can actually become a true person of influence regardless of your race or pigmentation. So let's move on to the next point. The next point is gender. Wow, there are people who say, oh, if only I was a man, if only I was a woman. Look, as long as your field of interest accommodates all gender, as long as your field of interest accommodates male and female, you can become a person of influence in that area. Don't look at the situation and say, oh, it is because she is a female, that is why she is actually becoming a person of influence in that field. It is because he is a male, that is why he is influential in that field. As long as your field of interest makes room for both male and female, gender isn't a barrier to becoming a true person of influence in your field. The next point we're going to look at is education. Sadly, many people feel that the more academic qualifications I acquire, the better my chances of becoming a truly influential person. Look, academic degrees can help you become influential in your field of interest, but that is not the real thing. To truly become an influential person in your field of interest, you must move beyond academic degrees. You must move beyond having a master's degree. You must move beyond having a PhD. You must move beyond becoming a professor. To become an influential person in your field of interest is much more than having academic degrees. So the next point we're going to look at is what? Ethnicity, which is closely related to race. There are some people who feel that because I do not belong to a certain ethnic group in my country, I cannot be influential. That is not true. Ethnicity may help you become influential to an extent in certain situations or in certain countries, but that is not the real way to becoming a person of influence in your field of interest. You must move beyond ethnicity. Ethnicity shouldn't be a barrier to you becoming a true person of influence in your field of interest. Now, the next point we're going to look at is title. This is the most dangerous barrier. Most people feel that, oh, until I get a certain position or until I'm given a certain title, I become a doctor or I become an MD, I become a GM. That is the only way I can influence decisions. Look, you don't need titles in order to become a true person of influence in your field of interest. Positions, titles doesn't really matter. And so the next point we're going to look at is religion. There are lots of people who feel that, oh, influence is restricted to my religion. It is only those who belong to a certain religion that can become influential in certain fields of interest. Look, when it comes to influence, true influence in any field of influence, it doesn't matter your religion. Religion cannot be a barrier to you becoming a person of influence in your field of interest. Next point we're going to look at is sex. Some people feel that, oh, you have to do certain things with your body in order to become influential in certain fields of interest. Look, if you truly want to be a person of influence in your field of interest, I can assure you that you don't need to abuse your body in order to become a person of true influence. Becoming a true person of influence is beyond the shape of your body, is beyond how you look, is beyond sex appeal. To become a true person of influence, you must move beyond that. The final point we have is occupation. There are many people who feel that, oh, for you to become truly influential, you must belong to a certain profession. You must be a doctor, for instance, or you must be a lawyer, for instance, or you must be a scientist, for instance, or you must be a business owner, for instance. Look, it doesn't really matter. Whatever profession you found yourself in, you can become a person of influence within that field of interest and even affect the entire world. So do not be restricted by your profession. Do not disregard your profession. Look, in order to become a person of influence, in order to become someone that will be a game changer, in order to become someone that will control an industry, in order to become someone that will control others and make other people follow you, you don't need to be restricted by your occupation. Occupation is not a barrier. Now, through my years of research on how to become a true person of influence in any field of interest, I've come up with a formula which I call the KUWP formula. It is through this KUWP formula that anyone, regardless of their field of interest, can become a true person of influence. I can assure you that when you learn how to use the KUWP formula, you will truly become a person of influence in your field of interest. And all these barriers we have mentioned will never be an issue to you anymore. So are you ready for this? Now, the KUWP is actually an acronym. K here stands for knowledge. In order to become a true person of influence in your field of interest, the first thing you need is knowledge. Knowledge of your field of interest, knowledge of your vision, knowledge of what you intend to achieve in your field of interest. To become a person of influence in your field of interest, if there is anything you should be bothered about, if there's anything you should be focused on, is acquiring as much knowledge as you can about your field of interest. You must get to a point where you're obsessed with gathering knowledge, gathering ideas, gathering information about your field of interest. When we talk about knowledge, what really are we talking about? It's simple. Knowledge is simply information. Knowledge is simply ideas. Knowledge is simply the gathering of information. Knowledge is simply a body of ideas. Knowledge is simply information. Now, how do you gather these ideas and information? You gather these ideas and information through personal research. It's not just about going to school. It's about your own personal interest, your own personal study. In order to become a knowledgeable person in your field of interest, what you truly need to do is to make sure you spend a lot of time researching about everything that has to do with your field of interest. You have to spend a lot of time learning from people, and you also have to spend a lot of time doing your own personal observation. That is how you gather the knowledge, the ideas, the information that you need in order to become an influential person in your field of interest. But then again, the knowledge you gather is useless until you are able to move on to the next level of your journey, and which is what? Understanding. The U here stands for understanding. Knowledge is useless until you have understanding. What does understanding mean? Understanding simply means to grasp the knowledge you acquire. In other words, it means to own the knowledge you acquire. So once you begin to gather information, once you begin to gather the ideas during the knowledge process, you now move on to the understanding, where you sit down and let that knowledge sink into your system and enable you process the knowledge you have in order for you to move on to the next level. Without understanding, it will be impossible for you to move on to the next step. Without understanding, it will be impossible for you to become a person of true influence. Becoming a person of influence doesn't begin and end with acquiring information. You must move on to the next step, which is understanding. You must get to a point where you gather the information that you have and begin to meditate on it and let it sink into your mind and let it become part of you, so that you'll be able to digest all that you have read. Without understanding, you can't move on to the next level. Now, the next level is the W, which stands for what? Wisdom. Now, there's this popular definition about wisdom. Wisdom means the application of what? Knowledge. In other words, the knowledge you have acquired at the knowledge process now becomes applicable during the wisdom process. You see, wisdom is the principal thing. What does it really mean for you to be wise in your field of interest? Now, remember those days when we have kings and queens, when we have the royal family. One of the basic requirements of a king is wisdom. Why does a king need wisdom? Because a king is expected to judge. A king is expected to take decisions. A king is expected to judge issues, to judge people. Now, think about your field of interest. Once you acquire knowledge and then you understand the knowledge you have acquired, you now get to a point where you become wise. In other words, you get to a point where you are able to judge between what is good or bad in your industry. So you get to a point where you can make decisions in your industry based on the right judgment, based on the knowledge you have acquired, based on the understanding you have. You will now be able to know the difference between good and bad, between right and wrong, between good and evil. So the wisdom stage is the practical stage. Is that point where you begin to practicalize the knowledge you have acquired and understood. So the wisdom level is that level where people begin to notice you. People begin to see your choice of words. People begin to see your choice of steps. People begin to see your choice of decisions. People begin to see you move in a certain direction that is remarkable. People begin to see you move in a certain direction that is reliable, and then they begin to come to you. A wise person is usually surrounded by a lot of people. Why? Because people trust the judgment of that wise person. So by the time you get to this level where you are wise when it comes to matters relating to your field of interest, you begin to gain influence little by little. You begin to get to a point where people come to you and ask you for solutions to difficult issues. And at that point, you are gradually moving towards becoming a person of true influence in your field of interest. For instance, let's say you are a person who is interested in going into the fashion industry. Let's say you want to be a fashion designer. The first thing you do, of course, is what? Knowledge. You acquire all the knowledge you can about your field of interest. You acquire all the knowledge you can about fashion designing, and you do that through training. You do that through learning from other people. You do that through studying as well, because you want to understand the entire industry. You want to understand what it means to become a fashion designer. So from there, you now move on to what? Understanding. As you gather all this information, you begin to understand the industry. You begin to understand the idea. You begin to gain a lot of confidence. And then from there, you now move on to taking decisions when it comes to fashion. You now move on to getting to a point where you know the difference between good and bad, where you know the right thing in your industry, where you become wise. So that's it. Becoming a person of true influence doesn't require all these barriers that we've talked about. If you can focus on these three principles that we've mentioned. So far, I've mentioned knowledge, I've mentioned understanding, and I've mentioned wisdom. But that is not all. We still have the last one, which is P. But that is a different matter entirely. And in my next video, I'm going to show you how you can move on from K, which is knowledge, U, which is understanding, W, which is wisdom, to the last one, which is P. Don't miss that video. Alright, and that's it on this edition of Shepherd Daily. If you enjoyed this edition, you can kindly like, share, and subscribe. And one great way you can show us some appreciation is by subscribing to our YouTube channel. Have a great day.